In the interest of time, I want to make sure that we go ahead and get started so we have time to maybe possibly have some questions at the end. I want to thank you for joining our webinar today on real-world challenges consenting and assenting children. We're delighted you're here, especially if this is the first time you're joining us. My name is Angie Price. I'm the Quality Improvement Director here at IAC for Children and your moderator for today's webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded. We will be able to provide the recording and the slides following the webinar, as well as you will be able to find our slides on our site network portal. The link to the portal will be posted as well as provided at the end. We do encourage you also to use the chat feature today. We want to have this webinar be interactive. If we have time, we hope to get to most of your questions. We'll do our best. For those of you that don't know, IAC is a nonprofit organization. We work with patients, sites, and pharmaceutical companies to expedite therapeutic interventions for children. IAC is an essential partner in the race against time to bring safe and effective pediatric treatments to children efficiently, ethically, and with an unwavering commitment to safety. We support a network of over 70 trial-ready sites by providing clinical trial opportunities, mentoring, educational webinars. We also work with pharmaceutical companies on pediatric clinical trial design, site identification projects, and initiatives to advance pediatric research. Now let's dive into today's webinar. The topic today came from our webinar back in May, and it was inspired by a lot of the questions that arose on unique scenarios that present themselves when consenting children that you don't necessarily see in adults. We recognize that the landscape changes significantly when you're approaching children to participate in research. This is due to their unique physical, mental, and developmental characteristics. We rely heavily on these regulations and guidance to ensure their rights, safety, and well-being. Unfortunately, despite all these safeguards, there continue to be errors surrounding consenting children and misunderstandings. Some of the audit findings include failure to obtain permission from both parents when possible. There is also incidents where children are capable of understanding the assent and they're not even assented or talked to about the trial. We also have the situations where there's no documentation, and if it didn't happen, if you didn't write it, it didn't happen. We hope that you come away today with a deeper understanding of how to avoid some of these pitfalls. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's panelists, who will share their experience and expertise in addressing unique challenges that sometimes present themselves when consenting children. We hope that addressing these challenges head-on can improve the quality and integrity of research and provide guidance on how you might handle similar situations. First, we have Eloise, the Quality Assurance Regulatory Manager at Cleveland Clinic Children. Eloise has over 40 years of experience in pediatric nursing and research, holding many roles throughout her career. She also mentors research professionals throughout the United States. Next, we have Kim Engleret, the Research Quality Assurance and Education Manager at Nemours Children's Health System. Kim is a registered nurse with over 15 years of experience in pediatric research. She leads a team of research professionals who provide education and monitoring for clinical research across 4 Nemours campuses. Finally, we have Erin, Richmond, the Director of Research at the Global Institute of Hispanic Health at Driscoll Children's Hospital. Erin has been a nurse for over 14 years. She has a strong background in pediatric oncology trials. She currently leads a team of researchers who support clinical trials in various subspecialties. The panelists will begin today by providing some tips on communication and documentation. They will then share how they handle some real-world challenges when consenting children. Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to hearing about your expertise. And now I will turn it over to Erin to share some strategies.
Thanks, Angie. Hi, everyone. Both parental permission and child assent involve information sharing, comprehension, and voluntariness. But these components are understood and operationalized in very different ways for assent, depending on the developmental level of the child. The more prepared you are, the better the parental permission and assent conversations will be. If you're new to consenting, I really recommend that you watch a more experienced person lead a consent and assent conversation. It will give you a sense of the flow and the overall tone of the process. Next, make sure you know that protocol and consent so well that you can explain it in very simple terms and start off with a concise and focused presentation of that key info that is most likely to help the family decide if they want to take part. Then go through a practice run with some of your coworkers playing the roles of parent and child. When you do schedule the discussion with the family, confirm that the person who's bringing the child to the visit is either the biological parent or has the appropriate documentation that they are the legally authorized representative. Follow your institutional policies and state regulations and consult your legal department if you're not sure. For simplicity, we will refer to the person giving permission as the parent in this webinar. When it's time to meet with the family, make sure you have a quiet, private room and something to keep siblings busy, like a coloring book, or even a separate waiting area for extra family members who may have come along. Your approach to the assent conversation will be child-centered and take into account the maturity and the psychological, social, and cognitive development of the child. Your IRB may have an age after which they expect you to have a signed assent document, but for some IRBs, that's around age 7. But even kids as young as 3 can take part in communication about their health care. So including them in that discussion, even if they aren't going to sign a document, can really help reduce their anxiety and help them feel more in control. You'll tailor your explanations to the child's developmental stage, using clear, simple language, visual aids, or models to aid comprehension. Avoid technical jargon and complex or abstract concepts. Use a normal tone of voice so kids don't feel like you're talking down to them, but then you'll adjust your vocabulary. For children age about 7 to 11, your focus will be on making sure that they understand their role in the study and what will be expected of them. Children of around age 12 and older can use logical reasoning and generally receive information at the same level as adults. There's this great quote by George Bernard Shaw. He said, "The greatest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place." Of course, the assent conversation has to be two-way, both delivered and received. To give assent, the children need to be engaged and interactive. Taking a few minutes to build rapport up front really promotes that engagement. Get down on their eye level so they don't feel like you're looming over them. Smile and make eye contact. And start with a simple question about something that might be of interest to the child, like, "Hey, what kind of dinosaur is that you've got on your t-shirt?" Maintain a calm, open, unhurried demeanor, and personalize the conversation by using the child's name. Many assent forms have pictures, and you can refer to those to help communicate key points in the assent. Throughout the conversation, you'll need to be alert to verbal and nonverbal cues. Like consent, assent is a process that continues throughout the study. So if a child is hesitant or upset, stop whatever you're doing and resolve it before moving forward. Here are some examples of jargon that you want to avoid and examples of alternative language. You can explain an abstract concept by relating it to something in the child's day-to-day life. Like, instead of saying that you'll take a study drug every 12 hours, you could say, "You'll take the study drug at breakfast and at bedtime." Once you've gone over everything, one of the best ways to assess understanding is to ask the child to describe what they've heard in their own words. Have them teach it back to you. Rather than yes or no questions, ask open-ended questions and allow for a gap of silence to give families a chance to think after a question before moving on. Finally, parents are already juggling a lot, and the parental permission and assent process can feel long and complicated on top of everything else, especially if their child is sick. If at all possible, give them a copy of the consent beforehand so they have time to take it home, read it, talk it over with family members, and think about questions they have. Let them know what to expect before they arrive for the consent appointment so they're prepared for the amount of time that it's going to take, a lot longer than usual healthcare forms. They may decide to make arrangements for someone to take care of siblings or come prepared with activities to keep them busy. Assent might be a new concept for parents too, so let them know that their child's agreement will be needed to participate and what that means in practical terms if the child decides that they don't want to take part. So we talked a lot about how to lead a meaningful, informed parental permission and assent discussion. Now Kim is going to review how to document all of it appropriately. Kim?
You're muted, Kim.
I don't know why it's not.
Nope, go back. You were doing well. There you go. You're good.
All right. Okay. Perfect. So just go ahead and do the next slide, Angie. Okay. So from consent to study completion, Alcoa Plus principles describe the qualities of good source documentation and its use in documenting a participant's progress in a study. The importance of good clinical documentation cannot be emphasized enough to ensure study results are built on the foundation of credible and valid data. Your informed consent process is not complete without the who, the what, and the when that occurred during that consent discussion. Okay. And don't forget, if you didn't document, it wasn't done. So we all know children and adolescents are vulnerable populations. However, there may be other aspects of their vulnerability that needs to be addressed. Be prepared, know your participant population, review your human subjects policy, and don't be afraid to reach out to your IRB for guidance. For instance, a child with cerebral palsy who is cognitively capable of understanding assent may have significant physical limitations in actually signing the assent form. Is making an X, their mark on that assent document, sufficient enough to tell the story of what occurred in that encounter? Or is further documentation needed in the assent note to explain why you're missing a full signature? And what if the participant is less than 7? An assent signature is not required. You should still discuss the study with the participant in their age-appropriate language and document that discussion. Okay. The documentation of the consent process includes the actual signing of the parental permission and the assent form, along with a consent encounter note of the who, when, and what occurred during that discussion. Parental permission comes first. A child cannot assent without the parent first giving permission. Make sure you have that current version of the parental permission in that assent form. It should be clear who completed the assigned signature sections and when it was completed. The parent participant to their section, the research team member who obtained consent to their section. When it comes time to obtaining the signatures, please don't hand the document to the parent or the participant and walk away. This is a time to hover. You've just reviewed 15 pages of parental permission and an assent. The signatures are often rushed through, and this is where mistakes are made. The parent participant need to be guided through their signature section and prompted where to print, where to sign, and where to date. That extra 2 to 3 minutes that you spend guiding them will eliminate numerous errors in the long run. And thoroughly review those parental permission and assent for errors prior to printing that copy for the parent. You need to provide them a complete and accurate document. So when there are corrections or when there are errors, and in correcting those errors, it is expected the person who made the error to correct the error, the parent to their section, and the research team member to their errors. Use good clinical practice, that one-line strike through, correct the error, include the initial of the person making the correction, and enter the date that the correction was made. If there are errors on consent forms and the consent dates, missing dates and signatures, an inspector or an auditor may question the actual adequacy of that informed consent process, so you don't want that to occur. Okay, next slide. Okay, now it's time to complete your consent note. And depending on your facility, the consent encounter note can be completed through your electronic medical records or a checklist by the research team member who obtained the consent on the date of consent. And remember, you cannot document consent if you were not there at that consent encounter. So don't let someone hand you a parental permission and an assent and say, hey, can you document this for me? Because that's not appropriate. Documentation of the assent should include the title of the study, the date and the time of the discussion, the names and the roles of those present at the assent and who conducted the actual assent discussion. Document whether the participant read the assent or if it was read to them. Notate that all questions were addressed and the participant voiced understanding. And if the PI was called in to answer some questions, notate that. Notate what occurred during that encounter. Document their agreement to that voluntary participation and that the assent occurred before any study procedures happened. You may include the version of the assent if that's required by the protocol, and document a signed copy of the parental permission and the assent was provided to the parent or LR if that occurred. The accurate completion of the parental permission and assent form, along with the consent encounter note, should tell the story of the consent process. In 5 and 10 years down the road, your consent documentation should stand alone on what occurred if, for instance, you are not at the facility anymore. So a lot of information on what to do with documentation. And now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Eloise, who will provide a high-level review of our consenting challenges and scenarios with children.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, guys. That was very good information. I'm sure all of us will use it at some point. As someone who has worked in pediatric research for many years, it has been extremely gratifying experience. However, it has also posed its fair share of difficulties. As I began my career in research, I realized that it was just as rewarding and challenging, especially as it relates to obtaining informed consent. Getting children to assent to a study can be very difficult at times as you're working with the entire family. As Erin mentioned, it requires preparation, particularly when we consider the age, maturity, and psychological state of potential subjects. All of those need to be taken in consideration. As we navigate through the real-life trials, we must adhere to regulations, GCPs, FDA guidance, and IRB policies and procedures. We must also consider our state and local laws, which will vary at each of your sites because we're all in different states. Your IRB may have different guidance as their policies may change as well. Your IRB will guide assent language and the need for assenting and the process as you contemplate the complexity of the research and the age, maturity, and psychological state of the potential subject. To determine a plan for assent, we must consider the guidelines for each of the age groups. Children are usually categorized into 3 age groups, 7 to 13, and 14 to 17. Then we must draft a plan that is appropriate for our research as well as our subjects. Each age requires a different conversation, and the document that the child is expected to sign upon affirmation or agreement to be on the study requires age-appropriate language. Now that we've reviewed all the information that Kim and Erin have provided, and you've developed a plan with the necessary documents, it's time to face the real challenges. Some of the potential challenges include assenting with divorced parents, children. Some of the challenges include assenting children with divorced parents, parents and children, disagreements between the parents and children along with both parents.
Thank you, Eloise. So we'll dive into some of these challenges. So now we'll hear from our experts about how we would handle these. Please keep in mind there is more than one way to approach a scenario. The objective here is to safeguard the child, ensuring the child and parent are fully informed and that regulations are adhered to. Our first scenario involves a poor dad. We tend to always blindside these dads. So dad is asked to bring the child to the clinic, and he thinks it's just a regular old physical exam. And lo and behold, he is being asked to sign consent for his child to participate in clinical trials. And he is impatient. He just wants to sign the form and get out of there. So we're going to talk about this scenario and how one might handle it. Erin, will you take us off?
Sure. Yeah, we actually had this exact scenario at our site during a vaccine trial. Dad thought they were just coming to the clinic to get a vaccine. He had no idea about the trial. He didn't want to read the consent or talk about it. He just wanted to get the vaccine because that's what mom wanted. So he said, show me where to sign. I'll sign. I just don't want to talk about it. So we told him that we weren't able to enroll the child without going over the consent document with him. So we sent him home with it and offered to reschedule them for another visit if they decided to participate in the study, starting with the whole consent conversation. So that's what we did.
Yep, that's very good. You know, we can see that it's imperative that dad is well informed and that he may need time to fully understand. I think that when we do this, we really avoid down the road having parents withdraw their children. So it's a really good step to take. And our next scenario involves parents who are divorced. So we have a mom that's brought her child in for screening, and dad's at work and he's totally unaware that mom has brought this child in. Can mom give permission for this child to participate? Eloise, how would you handle this situation?
Well, you hear a lot of this in research. It depends. And with this one, it depends on a lot of other factors that wasn't quite clear to me when I first read the scenario. But I'll try and respond with what I have or give some examples of how I would handle it in certain cases. In general, both parents would be involved in consenting the process when a child is enrolled in research. I allow both parents to look at the consent and talk it over with all the important people. You've heard that adage that it takes a village with these children. It pretty much take their entire village actually to get the patient on study and to ensure that the patient is there for all the visits and everything that would need to be done. You also need to look at your regulations and your IRB policies to see when one parent is appropriate more than the other or when you would need both. Basically, if it's a minimum risk study, you can have one person to sign for the subject, but it depends on who that person is. If it's requiring may require both parents to sign if it's involving more than greater than minimal risk. And those are all in your federal regulations that you can find. If it does need both parents, unless one parent is deceased, unknown, incompetent, or unreasonably available, one parent may be sufficient. The IRB may deem that, and you can follow through with that. Based on what I've got here, I can see that both parents are alive and well. They are divorced, and dad is reasonably available because he's at work. With the requirements of only one parent's consent approved by the IRB, my answer would be yes. But there's other circumstances you can look at. If dad is the sole custodial parent, then no, mom cannot sign without him. And keep in mind, you still want mom and dad to be involved in that process. If the study was IRB approved and with the requirement of both parents, then we're going to need to find dad at work, get his permission, and both parents would have to sign.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. You know, this can be a touchy subject, but we do our best to get with the information that we need to make an informed decision about how we should move forward. Speaking of touchy subjects, we're going to go to the next scenario. And this is a scenario where a child is being asked to participate because his brother has type 1 diabetes. And so he's being asked to participate as a control. So he'll need a blood draw and he'll need to sign some form of assent. I think Kim has a lot of experience in this area with her work in diabetes. Kim, how would you handle this scenario?
Yes, my first 15 years were involved in pediatric research with children with type 1 diabetes. And this scenario came across an abundance of times. You have a child, they're being enrolled because they have type 1 diabetes, and they want one of their siblings to also participate as a control participant. Well, sometimes that child with type 1 diabetes, they're used to being poked and prodded and blood drawn, unfortunately, but their sibling is not. And if the sibling is fully aware of what participation in this requires, and if that's a blood draw and they do not want that, and you've asked them for your assent, that you're going to have to accept their dissent. This is not a life or death situation. This is, we're asking you to be in the study as control. And if the sibling does not want to do this, then you're going to have to accept that no answer.
Thanks, Kim. I think the key takeaway here is no means no, unless
Yep.
there is a compelling reason. Wonderful. So now we have a scenario in which mom and dad aren't exactly on the same page. Dad has some concerns, and he's voicing that he's not sure about the adverse events that could possibly occur while his daughter participates in the study. Erin, I'll let you take this one.
So first of all, I think concern is a good thing because it means the parent's paying attention. So I would make sure that dad has a chance to talk to the PI about the side effects and about the potential benefits. And if he still has concerns, he could take the consent form with him to the pediatrician's office or another physician and get their opinion too. Because an ethical study really should be equipoised, we don't know if the intervention is going to help or not. So our job is to be careful to avoid trying to convince anybody to enroll. We should just try to give them the information that they need to decide. So if dad gets that info, whether or not he decides that his child should enroll, then we've done our job with consenting.
So we can see in this scenario as well, it's just important that the family be given time to be well informed. And dad just might need some additional time to digest the information. And again, I think this will really alleviate parents withdrawing later once they have time to go home, they go talk it over to the physician, and then they come back and you've done all these screening visits, you had the expense of doing that, and then they withdraw anyway. So I know that sometimes we have a lot of pressure to enroll and we want to become salesmen, but it is really important that we slow down and make sure the family is fully on board. So now the next experience can be really touchy. And this is where mom really wants the patient to participate. For whatever reason, she is really insistent. So she begins to bribe the child. In some cases, we'll go to your favorite restaurant, I'll get your favorite toy. But in this scenario, sometimes mom even gets a little mean and threatens things like, I'll take away your cell phone, I'll ground you. So I've seen these scenarios, and I believe that it's a touchy one. Eloise, I believe you're well versed in how to handle this situation. Would you like to share? You're on mute.
Yes. I guess the question is what do you do? Should you interfere? And absolutely, I would. I think when we run into this, we have to understand that children should have just as the rights as the adults. They have the right to agree to participate in the study, and it should be voluntary, and it should be of their own choice. So we need to give them time to understand what they need to do, and to make sure that they understand the study and make this decision on their own.
Eloise, this is Kim, and I completely agree. I've seen this situation time and time again, and a lot of this time, this is also with control participants. Moms offering them Chick-fil-A lunch every time they come and they get their blood drawn, offering them toys. They are racking up around Christmas time because they're being literally bribed to be in the study. And that's when you do need to step back and say, wait a minute, do you want to be in this study, or not? Does it really take your mom giving you lunch and all these toys for you to be in this study? So you do need to take a breath and just readdress the child and have mom step back for just a moment and ascertain, do they want to be in the study or not, and for the right reasons.
Absolutely. I think at the end of the day, it's just important that we ensure that the patient is making the decision independent of what the mom is saying. Thank you, Eloise. So the next scenario involves a 16-year-old boy who's honest about smoking pot. You know that this will exclude him from participating in the study, but you're not sure how to proceed. Kim, would you like to handle this touchy subject?
Sure. So he's just dropped the bomb on you that he has been smoking pot and he no longer is eligible for your study. First of all, it's important to know your state laws regarding the adolescent's confidentiality rights and disclosure of substance abuse. Some states permit disclosure and some do not without the permission of the minor. You need to bring your PI and your privacy and your legal in this situation. What are you going to do? He no longer is eligible, and you're going to have to go out, or he's going to have to go out and tell that parent that either I don't want to be in the study anymore because you aren't allowed to disclose this information, or there's going to have to be some conversations with the parent. You need to cover this up front with your parent and with the participant on what is the expectations are from the get-go when you have these kind of screening questions. This is never a comfortable situation. And, sometimes if you're the designee consenting, you just need to bring your PI or again, someone in there to help support you when this occurs.
Wonderful. I think you made some good points. Like, we need to maintain the trust, but we also need to follow the state laws. And this may require a different approach. The next scenario is also a difficult conversation. And it's, used to be when I was 20, 40 years ago, a 9-year-old using drugs and alcohol, having sex, you didn't really think you had to address this area. But today we have to. So how would you have this conversation, Erin? I know that it can be delicate.
Yeah, it is. And we know, unfortunately, that these topics are relevant for some kids. At the same time, we don't want to blindside parents by bringing up things that they haven't even decided to talk to their kids about yet. So I would talk with the PI about it before meeting with the family and see how they would approach it, especially if they already know the family well from that treatment relationship. They might have some advice on how to handle it. And then when it's time to talk to the family, I would talk to the parent about it first, very discreetly before bringing it up with the child. I would let the parent know exactly what the study requires that we go over, so that they know that we're going to talk to their child about that, and they can help guide the exact language of that conversation, so it's appropriate for that child.
Yep.
Just basically bring the whole team in.
Yep.
Get some help.
Spot on. You don't want to blindside the parent. I think that's the key takeaway here, is that you really need to have them on board about introducing these sensitive topics, especially if it's a 9-year-old that doesn't really know much about that. So the next scenario is also a difficult one. And this is where you have a 16-year-old female and she's participating in a vaccine study. I think we've done a ton of vaccine studies this year. And you have to talk about contraception, but her mom's in the room. So Eloise, how would you handle this scenario?
Well, it is a very touchy time when you have these teenagers coming in and they haven't had the talk with their parents yet. But what we do at our site is IRB requires that sensitive language like that, as it would be for pregnancy and for contraceptive, is added to our informed consent form, which is the document that adolescent this age would sign to document her assent for the study. So the ICF would outline the requirements for, a pregnancy test or contraceptive. And so that's where I would start, is exactly with the consent form. And that would give me an easy segue into having a conversation with the 16-year-olds. Now, all of us, privacy is important to all of us, and it's just as really important to subjects of this age, where they can't or don't feel like they can speak with their parents about it. So I've found that our patients, as well as the docs as well as the research teams are all aware that children this age do have privacy and aware of the state laws and our IRB policies. So for the most part, we can ask the 16-year-old if she prefers talking about something this on her own, because we've already addressed it in the consent, so it shouldn't come as a shock to the parents or to the child that you're going to have to talk about this. And then you can ask the parents if they would want to leave. Since they're all aware of this, most parents will eventually, they will just leave the room unless the child says, no, I want them to be in when we talk. I leave this to the PI as the physicians would talk about what type of contraceptive would be appropriate for a child this age and dealing with this particular study.
Wonderful. I think that, really making sure you adhere to your state and local laws. I want to say that loud and clear so nobody leaves and goes and does their, well, they said on this webinar, so make sure that you do that. But I think the important thing is to have a conversation, and if she is sexually active, to make sure she's using contraception, because you will be asked to document that. I do find it ironic that they're really private, but then the lab results come in and parents tend to see those and realize that a pregnancy test has been done. So again, it's just kind of communicating and following your state and regulations.
Yes, Angie, because they will see those results and they are aware that you have to do it. But after speaking with the child even along, we encourage them to involve their parents, as well as offering assistance to them to facilitate that conversation with the parents if they so choose.
Awesome. So our last scenario, you have a child that is in for screening and he is not interested. He's having a difficulty paying attention. He's pretending to read the form when he's capable of reading it. And he doesn't ask one single question. So Kim, in this scenario, how would you proceed?
So in this scenario, it's time to, you've obtained the parental permission, and they've given their permission for their child to go ahead with the study, and now you're going to have to direct your focus on that child or that adolescent. And if they're in the corner of the room and they're not acting interested, it's time to get them interested. You need to ask them, directly. Do those conversation starters that Erin had mentioned. Maybe there's something on their shirt that you can start the conversation with, and get them interested in you and your discussion with them. So you're going to ask them, did you read the assent form? And if they say no, just say, do you mind if I read the assent form to you? And if they say yes, then you go ahead and read the assent form, and then you're going to determine their understanding of what they're going to do. It's very important they understand they're going to be the best participant for you if they do understand what they're going to be doing in that study for you. So you ask them those open-ended questions. How many visits are you going to come, to see me extra than your regular visits? What kind of things are we going to be doing during your visits? Maybe it's an x-ray, or maybe there's a blood draw. Get them involved, and just to determine, are they interested or not? I did have a situation where I was, doing a parental permission and an assent, and the child was just at 7, but kind of an immature 7. And during the course of it, and it was a type 1 diabetes study, during the course of it, the child became just very erratic and started getting under the table and just crying and carrying on. Mom started saying, oh, they're just being bad, or we'll be done in a minute. And I just said, I don't think so. Let's check their blood sugar. Know your participant. We checked their blood sugar and they were 45. It's no wonder that just exact behavior change that they had from one moment being happy and I want to be in the study to now they're just totally unruly. Know your participant. Once we got that 45 blood sugar back up to about 110, they were back involved and we could go over that assent with them. So, know your participant and look for those behavior changes when you're in that assent process.
Wow, Kim, that is a great point. I think about the kids that I've screened after school, right? They are done with the day. Or the kid that maybe skipped breakfast because he's screening at 7:30 in the morning. Yeah, I think those are definitely important things to consider. Thank you for bringing those up. So now, Eloise, what do you do when you just don't know what to do? You're on mute.
I try and keep myself on mute so that I don't jump in and with everything, because I've probably seen a lot of these. But anyways, we've all encountered some challenges that are similar to what we addressed here. And I hope we've given you information to cover or help you guide you through what to do in these instances. However, in this short period of time, we cannot cover everything. And I want to emphasize that research is a collaborative effort and it's essential to utilize every available resource. If you face further challenges, please don't hesitate to seek assistance from other team members, such as social worker, legal staff, or your IRB. It is expected that every member of the research team will work together to overcome any obstacles that may arise, ensuring that the consenting and assenting process meets all the requirements of the Code of Federal Regulations, IRB policies and procedures, good clinical practice, particularly lining up with the ALCOA principles: attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, accurate, complete, consistent, enduring, and available at all times.
That is a good wrap up. So now we're going to have time for some questions, and I'm going to do my best. Some of these questions may be a little bit out of the scope that we can dive into right now, but we'll see how we can proceed. So the first question we have is about how to handle electronic consent. So I'm thinking that maybe they use REDCap or they use some type of electronic way. I'm assuming getting signatures. I'm not exactly sure about this particular question, but does anyone on the panel have any suggestions or guidance on this particular topic?
Sure, Angie, I'd like to take this one if you don't mind. This is Kim.
Absolutely.
So with electronic consent or remote consent, you should have a policy at your facility regarding obtaining remote consent, whether it be DocuSign or a telephone consent, or maybe you're doing a virtual consent over your computer. So first and foremost, I think as far as our IRB here, we have to have that approved through our IRB and how we're going to do that. A lot of times we have to have a script. So we have to submit a script to our IRB on what we are going to say to that participant during that remote encounter in that consent process. And then there's the actual signing, the signing of the document. You know, are they going to sign that at home and email it back to you, or send it back to you, or send it back through maybe one of your facility's apps? Are you going to do it by DocuSign, which is incredibly easy? I actually teach on DocuSign Part 11, and that's a quick process, you know, or is this through REDCap? So you need to know, you know, first you need to have that process approved. And then we're doing your remote consent. Usually there is a script, and the script may be just that you put a summary document at the top of that consent form and you read them in the entire consent. So you just need to be prepared, and you need to tell the IRB how you're going to do that. And then once you get it approved, you need to follow those, what you've told the IRB.
Wonderful. So the next question is about a hospital policy, and I do find this unusual, but they are stating that both parents have to sign the consent. It's just required. Any thoughts on that?
I'll chime in.
Actually,
A hospital policy for
let
all
me reread the
consent,
question.
minimal risk, greater than minimal risk, and all of that.
I'm going to reread the question. So it says, stating mom should always sign even if both parents are together. Yeah, you know what I might do? I'm just going to jump in here. I'd get my IRB involved.
Right.
Right.
I would
The IRB is usually the person who determines,
yeah,
you know,
I would,
who is signing. So,
yeah,
and they can, and, you know, say you have a minimal risk, but you have a lot of stuff going on. So we want 2 signatures. But typically your minimal risk is 1 parent signature, and your greater than minimal risk and above are going to be those 2 parent signatures. So typically it's the IRB who determines who Angie, and how many need to sign that consent.
Angie, if I could interject a little bit.
Sure.
This situation came about because we were recruiting a patient in the neonatal ICU, and the parents were not married and dad was not on the birth certificate. So that's where it comes into play about recruiting only the mom in this situation, or likewise situations, because without a paternity test, how do we really know that's dad?
Yeah, that's a specific scenario. So in that scenario, I would agree. I misunderstood the question.
No,
Thank you for clarifying. So yeah, I think that even other times, sometimes hospitals have policies in place. Sometimes it's an opportunity to educate them about research. I know that at my hospital, sometimes I had to spend a lot of time saying research is not the same as clinical care. And so there is an opportunity at times, not necessarily in this situation, that you do have to, educate your hospital administration. So I'd like to read a comment. And I think this is in line with what Lee was saying, is that, if the child is born before the mother is married, that, and she's not married, that she would be the one to sign the consent. So we have another question, and this scenario is when dad's at work and mom's in the clinic with child. Would you do a virtual consent? Would you use FaceTime? Would you use video? What would be acceptable?
Are you wanting them to consent, or are you just wanting to inform them of the study?
I think it's consent, and I think we touched on this earlier regarding following your hospital policy, right. Having a script. So I guess we really kind of already answered this particular.
And having it approved, right?
Yeah.
So
for sure.
Yeah, have an IRB approved first. I tell everyone when I do an onboarding orientation, and I said, you're doing yourself a disservice if you just don't go ahead and get remote consent approved by your IRB from the get-go these days. It's going to occur. It's going to come to pass when you told mom she was supposed to be there for that consent process and grandmother shows up. And grandmother's going to assist. She's like the second mom, and she should be able to do that. And it just puts you in a bad situation there. So if you had that remote consent approved, then you could call mom and say, hey, we're going to have to do it through remote consent. We've got it approved. You've reviewed the document, and then you can go forward with it.
Wonderful. So another scenario we have is, what do you do if the child doesn't want the other parent to know they're participating? So they've specifically said, I really don't want dad to know I'm doing this. Kim, how would you handle that situation?
I think that's, sometimes not quite appropriate. If you're in a clinical trial where you have a greater than minimal risk study and your parents are together and the child is in that home and you're using an investigational drug or investigational device, and your child, and he's out with the parent and something goes wrong, how are they going to know that they need to take their child to the hospital because they may be having a reaction to the drug? I mean, both parents should be involved in this decision with their child.
Great point. Erin,
I agree, Kim.
Anything to add? Or Eloise, go ahead.
We had a situation with one of our parents where the parents were divorced and did not live together, but had shared custody. So he was enrolled on the study, and we only need one family members, mostly with mom, and only needed one parent to sign. So he went through the study and talked to mom and got the kid on study. And dad was told about the study. But if they both are not in agreement and not knowing what all needs to happen, once the kid is with the dad on weekend, which happened to us, the kid didn't take the drug. He just didn't get the drug. And when he's there, dad lost the drug. Dad kept the drug, didn't send it back with mom. So it's very important that they both know about it. And even if you only need one parent to sign, it's really important generally to get both parents and any other family member that would be taking care of the child on board with the study, because it's just not going to be a bad deal in the end for the study, the patient, as well as all the paperwork that we would have to do.
And Eloise, I had that example with the device study. Mom was all into the study, dad was informed, but when the child was at mom, she had great results from the device that they were on. It was a new insulin pump and CGM, continuous glucose monitor. But when she went to her dad's, the readings were all over the place. He wasn't following the protocol or anything. So it really can affect your data too for your study. So you need to make sure everybody's on board. Completely agree.
Great comment. So this scenario I've never actually experienced, but how would you handle when there's a custody change in the middle of the study? So
I'll tap into this one. If who is the custody change involved with? Is this a foster child? Maybe you had a foster child in the study and now they've gone back to their parents. That's where it's going to be time that you're going to have to consent those parents. If there is a custody change, you are going to have to consent that person that now has custody of that child. And that's where we've kind of been guided, in our, from our legal and everything. And especially if there's, foster parent to foster parent, the conditions have changed. They're now in control. They need to be informed, right? So you're going to have to do that informed consent process.
That takes us to a tag-on question about assenting children in foster care and custody of a welfare agency. Erin, how would you handle that situation?
So every state is going to be different. In Texas, it's a little bit vague, but the interpretation is generally that the state won't consent to a greater than minimal risk child study for a child in their care. And typically foster parents, even though they may be able to consent to regular medical care, that they don't consent to research, especially not greater than minimal risk research. So I would say that's a question for you to work with your legal department on, because you want to make sure you're in alignment with your state law.
Absolutely.
And we do the same thing here in Florida. We send that documentation to legal. We don't even begin to pretend like we have that information to answer that question. So when we get LARS or foster or anything like that, we send it all to legal to review to make sure that whomever that is, they have the authority to sign that consent for that child.
There's a big difference between consenting to, like an ER visit versus a clinical trial.
Mm-hmm.
So the next question is proof that the mom is the biological mom. What do you ask that? Do you assume she's just telling the truth? Do you rely on the child? How do you make sure you have the biological mom? Eloise, do you want to field that one?
Actually, usually because we use Epic, we can look and see who the mom is. They do have pictures in there for the most part to guide us on who is the mom. I did have a situation where this happened once in my career where the parents were divorced and the dad was to bring the kid to the clinic, but the kid showed up with his wife. And she did, was going through things and, it just didn't for some reason ring right to me that it wasn't like who I thought it would be. So I went back to the chart and I did see the picture of the driver's license in there and I could make sure. And then just talking with the kid, I asked him, I asked the kid, where was his mom when I walked back in the room? And he said that wasn't his mom. That was dad's wife. So then, I mean, you begin to look into those things. And she did sign the consent form, but we were able to catch it and then be able to speak with the mom to get it to sign. So it is a problem when you have, divorced parents and they're married to someone else and they're sharing custody and sharing all of the issues surrounding getting a child to clinic and to school and whatever.
Wonderful. So we only have time for one more question. And this one's around, you have a child that turns 18. So it's time to consent them. And the parents don't want to leave the room. So the parent is kind of adamant that they're still a parent, that they don't want any conversations occurring without them. How would you handle this situation, Erin?
That is tough. I think just letting them know up front that this is just, we're required by the Code of Federal Regulations to provide a private area for consent conversations. And so that's how we have to conduct it and encourage them to, be on the same page, especially if the child is going to be reliant on the parent for their participation.
Sure.
I think I might ask the child, or the now adult, 18-year-old, do you want your parents in here or not? And if they say no, then it's time to take a look at the parents and, request that they leave. But also in this situation, I would make everyone prepared prior to us getting to this. When it comes time for a child that is assented now to consent at 18, you need to let them know that, that's going to be their option at the next visit. Next time you come, it's going to be your decision whether you want to consent for this study or not. And you need to make sure, mom or dad are in that situation so they know. So when the child or the adult now says, I want to do this on my own, everyone was a bit prepared before they even got there, right? And then you look at mom or dad who's there and said, Karen would like to talk with me herself about this. Do you mind just stepping out for a minute?
Very good. So speaking of being prepared, we're going to do a brief recap. And I think that we did hear about the importance of being prepared, know your protocol and know your family. And then next we talked about the importance of age-appropriate communication. We really want to meet the child where they're at. The importance of building rapport so the child is comfortable asking questions is really important. We cannot say enough about documentation. If it didn't happen, if you didn't write it, it didn't happen. And to make sure that you could tell the story 10 years later. I really like that. I really like that saying. And, I don't want to be sitting with an FDA inspector after you've left trying to explain your conversation. That is not a comfortable position to be in. And I can tell you I've been there before. So you want to make sure you capture the whole process. Really come away with no means no. I think that's a big area to be sure and clear about. And, lastly, you want to make sure, if you don't know how to handle the situation, that you get guidance. Don't feel the pressure of enrolling, of having to bring the patient back. Time management is key. But if you don't know the answer, it will save you a lot of time in the long run of getting the answers that you need. So I will say that this concludes the webinar, but I have a few announcements I'd like to make really quickly. So we would like to invite you to our next webinar, and this is on pediatric gene therapy. And we're looking at sites that may be participating or are interested in participating. We're wanting to see if you are prepared and if you are aware of the growth that is coming in this area. We will look at the approval landscape, how it is different, and we will also hear from centers that have had challenges and risks and benefits with participating in gene therapy. We really hope that you'll join us. We would also like to recognize and thank Gilead Science for their support with our educational webinars. We are grateful for their commitment to pediatric research education. As mentioned earlier, today's webinar will be available. The recording and slides will be sent out shortly, but this is also our site network portal where you can access not only this webinar, but all the webinars we've done previously. And if you're interested in planning to apply for CE credits, please reach out to us at this website, and we can provide you with the agenda and a certificate of attendance. Lastly, please take a moment to provide feedback on today's webinar. It really is, I'm the Quality Improvement Director. I want to continue to improve the webinars that we do. I want to make sure that we are delivering relevant educational programming. So we thank you for your time today. We know how valuable it is. We hope that you came away with some key takeaways. Please feel free to share this webinar, especially with your new employees. And we look forward to seeing you in June for our gene webinar therapy. Thank you. Goodbye.